Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Brother John Caliste. And thank you once again for having afforded me the opportunity to be doing the Comfort Zone program every Saturday afternoon right here. I want to apologize to our listeners, viewers for the late start. As you know, sometimes we have these little issues, these little glitches with the technology, and so that cause these things to happen through no real fault of ours. So it's a pleasure to be back. It's Raphael Paul Pablo, your host for the Comfort Zone. And I just like to serve you notice that this is going to be the final episode of the Comfort Zone for 2020. The Comfort Zone has been going from the last Saturday in July, and this is actually our 20th episode. That's the 20th edition of the Comfort Zone to end the year 2020. Before I get into the topic for this evening and the guest who is already here with us, I want to remind the people out today about an issue, an event that I've been speaking with you about for some time now, a couple of weeks now, and it is the St. Mark COVID-19 essay competition. We are still open and receptive to contributions to satisfy the commitment that we made to the participants to provide the first three in the three different categories with tablets and monetary contributions, and also to give a token to all of the participants. And you can reach me, you can reach out to me. My number, I'm very easy to reach. It's out there on my Facebook page. It's out there on the Facebook page, Ray Blue Leather Creation, where I advertise my leather craft work. For those of you who didn't know that I do leather craft, yes, I do. And it's 473-417-7666. We had this essay competition, three different categories: the 7 to 9-year-olds, the 10 to 12-year-olds, and the 13 to 15-year-olds. And they all had to do a composition on COVID-19. They had different topics under the banner of the COVID-19. And we're in the stage of assessment. And it is our intention for the opening of the school year to do the distribution of the prizes. So you can still contribute, and you can reach out to Mr. Bristol. He is the man that is in charge of the finances and so on. And his number is 473-418-0382. 418-0382. We have other teachers that are involved in this endeavor. Teacher Tikima Paul, Brother Shad Noel, Miss Fossil Charles, and also, I'm forgetting this other, Carol Ellis, teacher Carol Ellis. All teachers that's involved in this endeavor. It was endorsed by the three schools in the parish of St. Mark, the St. Mark Secondary and the two primary schools, the Bonnet Government School and the Samaritan Presbyterian School. So I just thought I would remind you that we are still open and receptive to contributions. So if you did commit and you have not yet made your contribution, you can still do so. So at this point, we are going to take a short break with a song that is very well known, a song by one of our top Calypsonian, top composers, the Black Wizard, O Grenada. And I expect Brother John would have that queued up there, ready to play for us. So, and afterwards we get into a very serious conversation, right? Wrong one, Brother John. That's the end one. It's the black wizard one. That's the shot.
Oh, Grenada, land of my birth, the way you suffered, oh, how it hurts, the tribulations you had to bear, will make Superman want to despair, but the blood of a martyr must not be shed in vain, oh no, we must rise and shine again. Days of reality, because only we could judge our destiny. Oh, Grenada, land of my birth, the way you suffered, oh, how it hurts, those tribulations you had to bear, will make Superman want to despair, but the blood of a martyr must not be shed in vain. Oh no, we must rise and shine again.
Yes, welcome back to the 20th edition of the Comfort Zone. And at this point in time, it is my pleasure to introduce a gentleman who is well known in the country and well known by many of you. But before I am not going to do the introduction, okay? I'll allow Brother John to play a clip here who will tell you his name and give you some background. And afterwards, I will tell you, well, before that, let me tell you that the conversation this evening, the topic for discussion this evening is restructuring our economy and the building of our Caribbean civilization. Okay? Restructuring our economy and the building of our Caribbean civilization. And I don't think it's appropriate for me to really try to tell you who the person is. So that's why I'm going to allow a very professional quality production that has been done with his bio to tell you who that individual is. Brother John?
Dr. Stephen Fletcher, a distinguished and accomplished professional whose career spans over 35 years in the private, public and not-for-profit sectors. His academic career includes Doctor of Philosophy in Management, Ashton University, England, Master in Business Administration, Middlesex University, England, Advanced Diploma in Management, West London College, Association of Business Executives, ABE, Diploma in Business Administration, City of London College, Association of Business Executives, ABE, and Diploma in Marketing Studies, London School of Accountancy, Chartered Institute of Marketing, CIM. Now, Dr. Fletcher is a proud son of rural Grenada, having born and been raised in the village of Concord. His consciousness of rural and national development started while he was still a secondary school student. while being a student at the Institute for Further Education and president of the National Students' Council. He organized some young men in the village of Concord and led the formation of the Concord Youth Cooperative. Since then, Dr. Fletcher remained an ardent thought leader and policy advocate on community and rural development, not-for-profits, and cooperatives. His career spans academic, policy development and analysis, as well as rural development. He taught at Aston University and Middlesex University in the UK, St. George's University, the University of the West Indies Open Campus, and the Institute for Further Education, IFE, now TMI Community College. Dr. Fletcher served as Grenada's ambassador to the European Union, as well as bilateral ambassador to many European states and the United Nations based in Europe. He also served as ambassador designate to the People's Republic of China. Plus, he served on the boards of directors of the Grenada Cooperative Nutmeg Association, Gcne, Grenada Public Service Cooperative Credit Union, ARISA, and the National Development Foundation. Finally, Dr. Fletcher works as an independent consultant with Campeche International Consultancy Incorporated.
So there you have it. I couldn't have done a better job. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Fletcher. Welcome to GEM FM. Welcome to the Comfort Zone. It's a pleasure to have you.
All right. Thank you very much, Pablo, for inviting me to be here. Let me also say that it's a pleasure to be here indeed, to be a guest on the program. I have listened to you on multiple occasions in the last few months. I also want to see how good it is to see my old comrade and friend, Mr. John Callis. John may remember and recall our days at the National Student Council. John was always a student and youth activist. Our paths crossed there, and it really marked an important period in our life when we were very much involved in youth and student activities in furtherance of the overall development of our beloved country, Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, and indeed the Caribbean. So it's nice to connect with you directly, John. Looking forward to this evening. And certainly let me say as well, good afternoon to your viewers and listeners, wherever they are throughout the world. I want to say good evening. And again, Pablo, thank you very much for being here. Just as a matter of introduction, Pablo, and John, let me say this. Your theme song and the theme of your program, which says getting out of the comfort zone, and at the same time being in the comfort zone by virtue of the program, in many ways it had an impact on my continuing commitment to engage in the public space, because it really touched me to the point of having me ask the question, has myself and colleagues remained in the comfort zone for too long? Is it time for us to begin to step out of that comfort zone that we have found ourselves in for the last 2 or 3 decades and be more engaged in contributing to an improved quality of life for our people? John, you may recall it's a commitment that we made way back in our teenage lives to contribute to that overall development. So this program for me, Pablo and John, it's really one that runs deep. It's really ones that run very, very deep. And hence I had no hesitation in agreeing to be part of your final program for the year, and an important number, the 20th program. Thank you very much.
The 20th program of 2020. Now, your bio indicates not just your areas of study, but your involvement and the offerings that you have presented in recent times. We saw that as of May 2018, you were doing the rounds with a matter of great import to our country, because we know our nutmeg product is considered to be our black gold. And you were doing a presentation that was headlined, Revamping the GCNA, a Must. And you came to Guelph. I happened to be at that session at the public library, and you also took it to other parts of the country. Can you just enlighten us on what was the importance of that, what was the significance of that, and why you felt it necessary to have done that study and to be presenting it to the people of the country?
Yes, thank you very much for identifying this, what I consider to be a very important piece of work, and my trajectory, my continued trajectory in life, despite sometimes my absence from the public space. Pablo and listeners, let us be very clear about one thing. The nutmeg industry in Grenada has been, and probably should and will remain, a very important aspect of our economic and social life. It is important on many levels. It's important at the economic level for the national economy as a main export commodity for Grenada that yields us foreign exchange revenue, an average of over $20 million per year. There are occasions in which we gained over $36 million per year. And that is at the macroeconomic level. But let us talk at the micro level, Pablo and listeners who understands nutmeg. That crop, that seed that comes out of that fleshy material that covers it, that we call the nutmeg pod, has been important to my life personally, my development, my education. And so too, it has been important for thousands of Grenadians, especially in the rural communities. Nutmeg is the one crop we have in this country and the one economic activity that allows you to put food on the table every single day during its ripening season. You can go under your nutmeg tree this morning, collect 5-10 pounds of nutmegs. You go into the nutmeg pool, what is called the nutmeg receiving station in Concord, Grand Roy, Guelph, all around the country, Bolio and Tebaid and so forth.
Victoria.
Sell that product, you get your money, you go to the shop, you buy groceries, you go home and you got food to it. That allows you to, for some of us, it sends us to school. It sends us to sports. So nutmeg is very important. So Pablo, when, as part of my overall development and thinking, when I got to the level of deciding to do a PhD or a doctorate in an economic field, I asked myself the fundamental question of what field of study should I employ myself so that I can then contribute to the development of the farmers, the rural community, and Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. I did not choose a very hypothetical kind of idea to go and research and fulfill some internal inspiration. I chose nutmeg because of that very important role that it played in our economic life. And therefore, by 2017, when I completed my PhD, to your question now, and having studied the industry in very minute detail, I came to the conclusion from my studies that if we did not restructure the Gcne, a process that should be led by the farmers and the community, if we did not do that, we can find ourselves in grave difficulties, and that which we found ourselves in 2020. So Pablo, I was heartened when you attended the session in Guelph. You're part of that audience, where I outlined the history of the industry, its importance at the macro and micro level, and to point to some of the weaknesses and to alert the leadership of the Gcne that they must revamp the industry immediately. Start now, or else you can find yourself in a position where the government of the day can use legislation to wrestle control of the GCNA and the industry away from the farmers and into the hands of whom we do not know. And this is where we found ourselves. So I was ringing the alarm bell in 2018 and trying to wake up consciousness to the issues.
So you did that back in 2018. And recently, we saw you making the rounds again, along with members of the Gcne board, along with representatives from civil society, and speaking to that issue. And there was a conversation, a national conversation taking place at the time about the merger of Gcne and GCA, well, quote unquote merger. And there were some serious concerns from different quarters and so on. Can you speak to that issue and how the two really relate to each other?
So having started the discussion about the need for restructuring in 2018, in May of 2020, Pablo, but let me say this, I was always concerned that we farmers and persons involved in real development, persons having a desire to see this country move forward and develop and so on, we remain concerned. So in May of 2020, I learned that the government has a bill which seeks to merge it was called basically, I think, the merger of the Cocoa and Nutmeg Association into one organization. But so I was alarmed by it, hearing of this bill. Where did it come from? In these COVIDious times, persons are under lockdown. GCNA was hardly purchasing nutmegs. What led to this attempt by the government to create this single organization? And probably I learned about it because at the time, I had written to both GCNA and Cocoa Association, proposing the implementation of a blockchain project, right, to help improve the efficiency and track records and so on of those two associations. And while I was in pursuit of this project, I learned about this new development. So I looked into the bill and I was astonished and shocked, literally, because what the government was attempting to do was to abandon the GCNA, abolish GCNA, abolish the Cocoa Association, take these associations away from the farmers, and put it temporarily in the control of government. But more importantly, the bill sought to liberalize or privatize the industry. In other words, the farmers were no longer going to have control over their livelihoods, over their industries. So that revved me up, Pablo. I got revved up and decided I have to go back to the farmers. I must go to the people and tell the people this story. I must go to the people and inform and educate them of what is unfolding before them. So I was joined, and I was happy to be joined by civil society in the person of Sandra Ferguson, who came on board with me. And we went to every single parish. We had meetings in every single parish, informing and educating people of this bill that, if it succeeded, would abolish GCNA, abolish Cocoa Association, and you then have to go back to the pre-1947 period. That's where we're going to go back to, the pre-1947 period, where when private people purchased nutmegs from farmers, where the farmers lost any ability to negotiate better prices, where they lost the ability to retain earnings and to benefit from the profits of the GCNA, which is what we call bonus, which is generally paid at this time every year, and which farmers look into. So Pablo, we took that on, and it ended in in Marischal House on September 24th,
Okay.
where we had what is called a high-level forum on the merger. In fact, we have this report here. I don't know if you can see it. This report came out of the high-level forum, which was held on 24th September 2020, and it can be accessed on my website.
All right. Okay. You mentioned the whole issue of liberalization would have been one of the outcomes of that merger, and it would have been taking you back into the 1940s, I believe you said. What is it that existed during that period that you feel would not have been favorable for the farmers, for the producers? And what do you think the impact of liberalization would have brought on the industry?
Great. Good question, Pablo. And it's a history lesson that I have to try and condense.
Yes, you have to try and condense it. I know.
It is part of my book called the my upcoming book to be published. It's already written and so on, called A Short History of Critical Events Leading to the Formation of the Gcne.
Okay.
But prior to 1947, 1947 was the year that the Grenada Cooperative Nutmeg Association was formed, right? Mm-hmm. Prior to that, we had a very chaotic market in which private individuals set up themselves as buyers of nutmegs on the domestic level. They would then purchase nutmegs from the individual farmers through a process of haggling, right? So individual farmers like myself come to you, Pablo, and I'll offer my nutmegs. You will negotiate with me. And of course, the process is, because it's private business, is to get a lower price as possible. That price was also influenced by foreign agents, who you then, Pablo, as a local agent, will sell your nutmegs to. So it was a process of haggling and hassling that characterized that period. So the prices were always depressed. Secondly, a second feature of that pre-1947 period was a feature in which there was no guarantee that all your nutmegs would be purchased by the private individual. Okay. One farmer who went through this period told me a very grim story. A story that we learned while we were on the road to inform and educate farmers of an evening when his mother gave him a quantity of nutmegs to be delivered to this private buyer. He went there the afternoon, hoping that he would receive, or that his nutmegs would be purchased, and he would receive monies that will be used to purchase items for the dinner. He turned up only to be told by the buyer, "I am sorry, I cannot buy any more for the day."
Okay.
That was daunting. These were the kind of conditions that led to persons like T. Noble Smith and others clamoring for a change in the situation, clamoring for the formation of a cooperative that will purchase all of the nutmegs produced by the farmers through the length and breadth of Grenada, establish one price for every single farmer. No matter whether you sell 10,000 pounds or 5 pounds, you'll receive the same price per pound. And very importantly, at the end of the financial year, you will receive the bonus. It will be shared among the farmers. Those were important features of that period. And therefore, the formation of Gcne was in a response to the haggling situation that led to depressed prices by the farmers, to the farmers, and ultimately to a lower quality of life. The Gcne sought to change that. And this is why, Pablo, this is a fight for the soul of Grenada. Okay. It is a fight to save, in fighting to save the Farmers Association, we are fighting for Grenada. But let me hasten to add, despite that fight, we must also recognize the need for change in the Gcne. It is not to say that Gcne must not change. There are some things we must change to ensure that Gcne brings greater benefits, not only to the farmers, but to Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Matin. The nutmeg must be one of the, and George Brisen captured it very well in the 1970s 1970s, referring to our nutmegs as Grenada Black Gold, pointing to the potential that this product had to transform the economy of this country, to transform the quality of life of our people, to aid the development of our dear and beloved country. And this is the fight that we took on. And I can say that we have had very good results from inserting ourselves into that debate and standing on behalf of the farmers and the working people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique.
So that being said, what are some of the things that you feel should be done? You know, what elements that would you propose in terms of revamping the GCNA? As you rightly said, it needs revamping. What are some of the things that you think need to be done? Given the fact that we saw another doctor, and actually she's from your community also, she came from the same village, and she seemed to have a different perspective on the whole issue. She seemed to believe that liberalization is important. She also seemed to think that with the way that the structure is right now, entrepreneurs are not going to get involved in it. And she felt that the opposition to the merger was based on people's political leanings. What do you say to that?
Firstly, Pedro, I will immediately reject out of hand this notion that this issue has anything to do with party politics.
Okay.
Out of hand. My dear friend and colleague and village young lady, she was at that forum on September 24th, and she made her voice heard then. I respect her opinion, but I must reject the issue of particization of this issue. It's not a party issue. Right. It is fundamentally a farmer's issue and a development issue. And I frame it in that way. Secondly, regarding to the issue of liberalization, Pablo, we know, everybody listening to this program knows, that one of the benefits of a liberalized market generally is lower prices, not higher prices. Lower prices. Look at our telecommunications market. We used to pay $4.80 per minute to call London. Today we are calling London for free, right? With WhatsApp and Zoom and everything else. So if we were to apply that to the GCNA situation, it means that the farmers would definitely be receiving lower prices, not higher prices. Third, on the issue of entrepreneurship participation, I do not share that view. In fact, Pablo, I argue one of the pillars of my argument of change has to do with the ownership structure of the GCNA. And here's my recommendation on this. The GCNA is at a position right now where it needs to go to the high end of the value chain. We no longer could continue just exporting the raw commodity and hope to gain greater income and revenue from it. We have to get into value addition. To get to the value addition levels and at the level of the scale that is required, the GCNA in itself doesn't have the capital, doesn't have the finance to do it. And here's the opportunity for entrepreneurs, for businesses to get into this GCNA and to help transform it. So what do we do? The first thing I argue for is on the issue of governance of the GCNA. We must change the structure of the GCNA by maintaining the cooperative nature of it, maintaining all the good things about it, the bonus payments, the right to sell off all of your nutmegs to the association and so forth. But we must open it in order to attract finances from entrepreneurs to allow it to go up the value chain that it cannot do on its own. So we must attract private capital, local private capital first and foremost, because Pablo and listeners and viewers, this country is awash with monies in the banks. We must create opportunities for the savers, residential and businesses, to invest the money in high-value products that can be exported and for us to gain return. So my first response is that on the issue of opening for private capital, I agree with it. But how do we do that? Before we can open up, we must do this important issue. And one of our strong recommendations out of 20 recommendations that we have here is to capitalize the industry. The issue of capitalization, which basically means that the farmers must own the industry, Pablo. Unfortunately, over all these years, since 1947, we were told that the farmers own the Gcne. And in fact, by patronage, by services, they own it. But you know what? Legally, none of the farmers has a piece of paper which entitles them to shares in the Gcne. So our recommendation is that, and that came out from consultation with the farmers throughout the length and breadth of Grenada, is that we give farmers ownership by giving them their shareholdings. And there is a formula that already exists that was proposed by the University of the West Indies, right? By Professor Rankin and two other professors. They first provided this formula. This formula was accepted and expanded upon or revised by a European Union Development Fund consultancy, which accepted this in principle. And so we must give farmers ownership through legal title of the association. So all is not lost. And whereas my dear friend, Dr. Gcne, whom we refer to, made those comments, and I will say this, she wouldn't mind me referencing her name because she's in the public domain on it. She has written publicly on it. All is not lost. We need to revamp the industry. A fully liberalized industry cannot be good for the farmers. It cannot be good for Grenada. But let me give one caveat, Pablo, on this issue, which I've said publicly and I'm repeating here again. There is an aspect of the nutmeg trade that I believe that the Gcne can be open towards issuing license. You see, one of the things that Gcne has that is not used, Gcne has the authority currently, under current legislation, where it can provide license to individuals or firms that wish to export nutmegs from Grenada. It has that authority. There are a group of persons in Grenada who currently produces organic nutmegs that I know is sought after, and they receive a very a higher price per pound or per ton for that nutmeg. In fact, while I served as ambassador in Brussels, I had the opportunity to visit one of the companies that use these organic nutmegs that's based in Germany, a German company that uses these organic nutmegs. So at the moment, Gcne is not in the business of exporting organic nutmegs as a specialty, as a special product. These persons who have the capacity to do so, I believe there could be even an exemption provided with a license and allow them to export these nutmegs under strict conditions and guidelines. This is an exemption that I would certainly make and encourage the Gcne and the government to provide.
Okay. You made special reference, I didn't call her name, but there is that article in absolutely that she's written and it's been published, you know, it's out there in the public domain, and it was that article I was referencing. In that article, she said the following, and I want to know if that really resonates or is synonymous with what you spoke to about the ownership by the farmers. She says, indeed, most of the assets that show up on the balance sheet of the GCA or Gcne are non-performing and do not generate revenue. In cases where revenue is generated, it only maintains the same asset, pay liabilities, and yield no returns directly to the farmers. So, while farmers are arguing about the assets of the organization, they have no control over how the revenues are utilized and will never see these returns in their own balance sheet to recover their investments. Consequently, they must subsidize their income and farm operations from some other sources. What do you have to say to that?
Again, let us unbank this statement. Let us break it up a bit.
Yes.
The first aspect she addresses, if my memory serves me right, is the issue of the non-performing assets of the Gcne.
Okay.
And that is true. Gcne do have a large quantity of non-performing assets in the form of nutmeg pools around the country. As you know, Pablo, Concord Pool, for example, my dear village, that pool has remained closed since Hurricane Ivan. Prior to Hurricane Ivan, Gcne had 21 receiving and processing stations. Today, there is 9. As we speak, the pool in Grenada has been rented to the police. One of the first and the largest pools that were built by the farmers of this country in Grenville has been sold for retail purposes. Right? So we have a number of non-performing assets. Samaritan Pool is not performing and so on. But you know the reason for this, Pablo? The reason for these non-performing assets today are a direct consequence of the failure of the government and the Gcne post-Hurricane Ivan to get the nutmeg industry back into production. They are not performing because somebody decided they should not perform, one group of individuals, but it represents a national collapse of our citizenry, of our governance, and the leadership of successive boards of the Gcne to get the industry going. And in particular, the failure of the government to give direction. We vote governments into office to manage our affairs, whereas we do not want them into every decision we have to make. They have a responsibility to provide leadership, including economic leadership. The government of Grenada has 3 members on the 9-member board of the Gcne. The powers of the Minister of Agriculture in the affairs of the Gcne is overwhelming. In fact, if you go through the ordinance of the Gcne, the Minister of Agriculture name by means of power and responsibilities is mentioned over 50 times. Such is the power of the Minister of Agriculture. In fact, the Minister of Agriculture do not only appoint 3 government representatives on the board of directors, but he has the final say in the employment of the general manager of the Gcne. Okay. Such is the overwhelming power. And therefore, the government failure to drive the redevelopment of the industry post-Hurricane Ivan led to these non-performing assets. The other point that we should be mindful of in this regard is that as farmers, we should also hold ourselves responsible for failing to take our leadership to task on the revitalization of the industry. We all folded our arms and we left it up to them. Today, the result of that is that Grenada has fallen from the number 2 producer and exporter of nutmegs in the world to number 9. We are no longer in the top game. And hence the problem of the association, Pablo, the problem now is that we are producing so little quantities of nutmegs that our ability to negotiate higher prices is significantly reduced because we do not have the quantities to supply.
Okay.
Finally, on the issue of my colleague's statement of having to do other things to subsidize income. Well, you know, Pablo, we all know this. There are very few nutmeg farmers in Grenada that has sole dependency on nutmegs for the economic livelihood. The majority of farmers in this country, nutmeg farmers, also performs 2 and 3 different tasks. My father, for example, was a typical case in point whom we inherit from. We had nutmeg lands, but he was also a tradesman. So he goes to work from 8 to 4, and after 4 we go to the land, and on weekends we can look at after our nutmegs. So the farmer, and this is a piece of financial economics here. So if you have 5 acres of land, generally that land is multi-cropped. You do not rely on nutmeg solely for your existence, for your subsistence or economic livelihood. It is normally complemented by other things. So to give the impression that you really, as a nutmeg farmer, you are forced into other economic activities to survive is half the story. We must teach our farmers to maximize the lands that they have. And Pedro, Pablo, I said finally before, but final on this issue. I'm looking for the data, I don't have it now. But it will surprise you to know that over 85% of the nutmegs that are produced in this country is produced by farmers owning between less than 1 acre and 10 acres of land.
Okay.
Right? So that really, I think, puts a cap on this story of farmers having to find, other means of livelihood. The point is that this is part of the structure of the industry. That's where it's structured. Sorry for taking so much time on this matter, but I thought it was important enough to educate the listeners on this very important issue.
Yeah, well, I deliberately started off here because this is a conversation that started in 2018, and we saw how it developed this year, and all that's been happening surrounding it. So based on, because presently we're not hearing anything about that merger, can you tell us where this is at and where do we go from here in that regard?
Well, I will tell you this, Pablo, since the hosting of this event, and we submitted a copy of this report to the Minister of Agriculture, Minister Peter David. He was kind enough to have me at his office, where we did an official handover of this report. Unlike the previous Minister of Agriculture, who denied our invitation to attend this high-level roundtable on the matter, she was unable to attend, and no one from the ministry attended this conversation, but the minister did. And I think that he looked at the report in some sincerity and honesty. And the current public position, as we know it now, is that the matter seems to be in abeyance, right? The matter is certainly not on the front burner at this time, but we must remember, we must not rest on our laurels. Farmers, people of Grenada, interested parties, we must remain eternally vigilant on this issue. Because when the bill was brought out in May 2020, it was never part of any prior discussion publicly. It was not part of the 2020 legal agenda, legislative agenda. It was never a public statement by government or intention of the government to move to liberalization of the market or mergers. Now, there were consultancies that were done that looked at mergers and liberalization of these industries, but it was never formally announced publicly that this will form part of the government legislative agenda, but it was sprung upon us in May 2020. So at the moment, it seems to be off the table, which we called for. Campeche was very clear in calling for this matter to be withdrawn from the negotiating table, taken out, and that the new Minister of Agriculture coming in has an opportunity to press the reset button and to go back to the farmers and begin the conversation there with the farmers. Let the farmers decide what type of association they want. Let the farmers exercise the freedom of association to determine what kind of organizational structure they wish to have their commodities be traded by. So that's where that is at the moment. And we are happy to have been part of the influencing force on that.
Okay. So we see that Campeche consultancy has been involved not just in the nutmeg business, but you also have been doing work on behalf of CARICOM and the ECCB. So much so that last year you were involved in the rolling out or sensitizing people on the digital currency project of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And so can you elaborate on that for us?
Certainly, more than happy to do so. So just one little clarification here. Our public discourse series, what we call Campeche Development Discourse, is an independent activity outside of the main consultancy that we do in terms of providing public and private sector consultancies. So when we took on the issue of the digital currency, when we got involved and began our public education on it, it was done purely by ourselves, by Campeche. We certainly invited, as you may recall, the ECCB to join us, and they sent participants to it. So that was very good. So listeners may recall that about 2 years ago, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the central bank for the Eastern Caribbean countries, or currency authority as they call themselves, announced that it was undertaking research project into the establishment of digital currencies. That was deemed to be necessary because of the development of monies and the development of trade globally. As we know, our region is very much inserted into the global trading arena. We continue to trade, or else we can't survive, really. Nutmegs must be sold. Tourists must come to the island and so forth. So we have that going. On the money side, money started to take on new forms. The growth of the internet as a medium, as a conduit for doing business, meant that you had to have the associated financial instruments to conduct online businesses. And therefore, digital currency evolved out of that need and out of that desire. So the developing world, private monies became important in the development world, right? In the developed world, sorry. And therefore, we saw the development of various, what was called cryptocurrencies, which is the digital currencies owned by private individuals. These currencies started to take on enormous proportions in economic activity. People started trading in various, we know some of those currencies that are around and so forth. Central banks around the world, whose main purpose for existence up until this time is the management of monies in the various economies, but also the supply of money. So here we find ourselves in the 21st century, where central banks were basically losing control over their ability to supply money and manage money, because we have a form of money that evolved called digital currencies, which is a set of numbers that we can exchange and transfer and so on, of which they have no control over. The ECCB, to its credit, decided that it must get involved in that area and it must develop such currency for a region. So our session in 2019 was aimed at providing the business community initially with information on what this digital currency is about, the background, its implication for businesses, and how do we go forward with it. So it was in that context that we inserted ourselves into it. Plus, my own interest as well in development. You know, Pablo, one of the things you'll find about persons like myself who are deeply engaged in thought processes about development, our fingers or tentacles spread into many areas in health, technology, commerce, and so on, because we are always looking at pathways that would lend itself to the development of our economies. And digital currencies is one of those that of interest to us from a developmental perspective.
So based on where we at right now, and the fact that you say this is going to be, these are the new monies that come into play, and so, and the direction that the world is taking, and we see that as a consequence of COVID recently, e-learning has become more critical to our education process, our education agenda than previously existed. We saw that even primary teachers had to be giving assignments to the students using the internet and so. How critical is this cryptocurrency, you know, this digital currency to our development agenda going forward? And how do we as regular people position ourselves to be able to participate at that level?
Very important issue again, Pedro. It's Pablo, sorry. It's a mega issue. Issue of digitization of our economies generally in this COVIDious period is critical. In fact, I did an article recently in September, I think. I looked at the development of digital currencies globally, what central banks are thinking and doing in light of COVID. And since COVID, there has been an increased effort to get the digital currencies out for many reasons. One of the key reasons is to reduce the interaction between human beings and cash, right? And also reduce the propensity for us to go out and do physical shopping. So the intention is that there will be more online shopping, and with more online shopping, there will be greater use of digital currencies, right? So central banks around the world have been inundated and has been ramping up research and development work for digital currencies. What it means for us. The implication for us, it means that we will have to get used to trading, buying and selling on the internet, first and foremost. As you know, increasingly, more and more Grenadians and people from the region are shopping on the internet. It was given new life and was intensified during the COVID period and continuing to do so, where people feel more comfortable getting onto the computer, ordering the products and services, having it delivered rather than going into stores and so on and buying. So it means that we as persons will have to get used to this new form of purchasing products and services online. But you know, here is the catch-22 situation. I have argued that whereas I understand and empathize with the need for digital currencies, but there are a couple of things that digital currencies will not do on its own. One of the things it will not do is to create more job opportunities. One of the things it will not do is to put more money in our pockets. Because to be able to have a digital currency, you must have a job. You must earn an income.
Yeah, you must be generating income.
You must be generating income.
Okay.
And you must have a bank account. Okay. Because the digital currencies run off either a bank or some financial intermediary. Okay. So the mass of unemployed people that we have growing in Grenada today and tomorrow, if we do not put a stop to it, the digital currency will mean nothing to us. We will not be participants of that economy. Instead, what we will be doing is developing another elitist economic group in our society that trade with digital wallets, right? They have their telephone, We have our digital account in it. We go into our store and we get involved in digital exchanges. That is what's going to happen. It will not solve the fundamental economic problems that confronts us. It does not restructure the economy on its own. It does not lend itself to a discussion and a policy discourse which says that for us to up the ante of development, for us to improve the quality of lives of our people, that tourism and construction are not the only two sectors that we must focus on. We need a new paradigm for this to work. We need to revolutionize and to revamp and re-engineer our societies. Digital currency on its own will not do it, but it has a major role to play in helping us to rethink the way we do our economy, the way we do our social life, and the way we do everything, because the internet is here to stay and we must interact with it.
You know, you have introduced a word in the conversation which takes us right into the next element of our conversation, the issue of restructuring. And to get us into that element of the conversation, I want our technical operator to play a clip that he should have lined up there, that I call restructuring time. And afterwards, we'll continue with the discourse. Brother John?
We are faced as humanity with one of the most severe viruses to afflict mankind in recent years. So as a small island economy that is so open and dependent on foreign trade, especially tourism, for very survival, it is important that we begin to look at the consequences of it. I think one, we are very well could be seeing a global recession. Over $2.7 trillion have been lost in the global economy. We are seeing the impact of what's happening on cruise ships and on travel. In the UK, for example, Flybe, one of British Airways' subsidiary companies, has gone bankrupt because of the coronavirus, which led to massive cancellation of flights. So those are some of the consequences that are going to come our way. These are the economic headwinds that economies like ours are going to be facing up to. As you know, Grenada is heavily dependent, not just on tourism for its survival, but also for our very daily consumption of food. We import $1 billion worth of items annually. What is the consequence of that, of a global slowdown? It means that the boats, our imports are going to decline. The boats coming in will begin to be more and more sparse, and therefore it can affect the supply of products in Grenada. Social distancing, it's one of the responses, one of the true responses that you normally have in a health situation like this as we're experiencing. So we're likely to see the escalation of digital currencies, the escalation of e-commerce and e-trade going to be taking place. Also, we're likely to see the impact of e-learning. This is an opportunity, as bad as it is, as terrible as it is, and we are not yet sure of what the final consequence is going to be, because the virus is still escalating, it is still migrating, as I would term it, from country to country. We have to look at our food security issues. And I think it's an opportunity for us to really conduct some structural changes in our economy. One of those would require us to go back to the land, to go back to agriculture, right? To begin to produce more of our needs, eat what we grow what we eat. Now is the time for truly implementing that kind of philosophy that we have preached over the years.
So that's cutting. These are some cuts that I took from a presentation that you did way back in March of this year, when we were just getting used to the idea of what COVID is. And there you were speaking about the need to restructure the way that we do business, the way that we treat with our economy. And so can you, from that time to now, that was March, we're talking about 9 months ago, can you say that we have begun to move in that direction in any serious way? And if not, what do you propose we ought to be doing to get to where we need to be in terms of restructuring the way that we do business and making our economy being more self-sufficient and so on, making our economy be more viable for all?
It is disheartening. I think it is very disheartening for me to say that from March, I think things have worsened. Things have worsened from a policy point of view, from a focus of where we should be going and restructuring. You know, the recent budget is very telling. So let me start from that base. COVID came upon us. It was unpredictable. We never predicted COVID, but it came, it arrived. And I thought it was an opportunity to force us as a people, as a country, as a region, to really rethink the way we have been doing business over the years because of the consequences and the effect that it has been having and continues to have. But it didn't. In fact, I would say that, and I'm doing an article currently on this issue, that COVID has really served to expose the cracks that already existed in our economy. It took all the fault lines that already existed. So between March to now, I saw nothing. And I was looking forward to the budget to point to new directions, to give new directives. I thought even if in the past 9 months, there was not an opportunity for the policymakers to rethink, or they did not want to be seen to be reactive, but that this 2021 budget was going to be the platform to give the new direction for restructuring and change of the economy. It did not happen. In fact, the budget theme itself, the budget did not even reflect its own theme, right? So I would surmise this by saying that we are in a worst off position. We continue to rely on tourism. The budget clearly speaks to this reliance on tourism. But worse yet, you know, Pablo, and I suppose we may talk to this later on, our recent upsurge in COVID cases on island, the sources and consequences of that. But more importantly for us, the budget points to a consolidation of the policymakers' development view, the policymakers and the government concepts of how they're going to drive this economy, where our resources are going to come from, where it is going to be used, and what policies government is going to support. So despite the rapid decline and loss that we have seen in revenues from tourism, commodity prices continues to drop. We have taxation dropping, revenues from tourism on the decline. We still write a budget which says the focus is really on tourism via construction. But listen to this, the construction that we talked about will really be driven by the National Transformation Fund, not from the taxes that will be generated, which is insufficient. What is the National Transformation Fund? The National Transformation Fund is funds that government receive from the sale of our passports through the Citizenship by Investment Program. Of the over 122, I think, $1 million that's been projected to spend on capital projects in 2021, the National Transformation Fund is expected to contribute over 66% of that revenue. So It's not just tourism we're relying on, as we know it in terms of persons coming into hotels and spending their monies and so forth. It is on the sale of our passports. So how many passports are we going to be selling to finance the capital expenditure? And what are the implications socially and culturally for Grenadians, for our local population, our local cultural practices and so on, from such a policy? Whereas the other thing I must point to, let's look at the allocation to agriculture. Agriculture took 7th place in the 10 major categories of government expenditure of about $18 million. At a time when we need to upend agriculture, when we need to do agriculture at the basic level, but at the high value end, we are not seeing that. We are not seeing, Pablo, at a time when we know from COVID over the last 9 months that the groupings that are most affected by COVID and where the mortality and hospitalization rates are the highest are persons who are suffering from pre-existing conditions, health issues of hypertension, diabetes, and so on and so forth. In our Grenadian context, our high food import bill is guaranteeing us those our change in lifestyle of highly processed foods and so on are contributing to that. So I would have thought that one of the ways forward was to really restructure the way we do our business in this country with a focus on healthy lives, healthy living. That would not only treat with the COVID situation, but it will have wider health impact on health issues on Grenada. It is likely to lead to less persons going to seek general practitioners' assistance, a healthier society, a reduced bill to the National Treasury for financing health. But we did not do that. We are basically saying more of the same. So if we are doing the same thing over and over, we can only get the same results. So there is no change. There is no restructuring. We need policymakers that will fundamentally shift the development paradigm, revamp this economy, relook governance issues. Tourism is important, yes, and it must form part of the integral development cycle. It's a pillar. But you know what I would have done, Pablo, what I would suggest? That we go back to some basics, that we learn from the revolution. We learn from the PRG policies. We grab onto the positive aspects and we leverage those. So here's what we do. We decide we're going to build an economy with 3 fundamental pillars: government, private sector, and the cooperative sector. Build cooperatives around the country that will involve in basic agriculture and value-added agriculture, processing, and so on and so forth. The private sector, it must not be lip service to say that, look, the private sector is the engine of growth and government responsibility is to provide the enabling environment. What does that mean? A lot of fancy words that does not translate into anything practical on the ground. I would submit that governments with solid policymakers in the midst, not just government, but a government, not faceless government, I should say, but a government comprising of well-thought persons that are developmental orientated and has the capacity and the tools available to transform this economy and to play a leading role in driving the economy. Government must partner with the private sector in a real and genuine way, provide genuine opportunities to network with the private sector, to be hand in glove in identifying opportunities and working to restructure this economy. It must not just be saying, well, we have opportunities in construction, so we leave it up to the private firms to bring in cement and whatever else and nails and sell it. But we must come in a marriage in identifying common goals for this country, common objectives, and the government and the private sector working hand in hand to achieve those objectives and goals, right? The cooperative sector, I think, is a critical sector in all areas, in agriculture, in furniture making, in key industries, local industries, where we can pull our young men and women together in groups and in teams, right, to produce products and services for our consumption and for export. I think if we can go back and build on those three fundamental pillars, and then to take that downstream, right, catapult it downstream and so on into various policies and program initiatives, we can build a better, stronger Grenada that will set the tone for the restructuring, the revitalization, and the refocusing of our economy. At the moment, this economy is not focused right. We're only going to breed bigger problems going forward.
Based on what you just said, well, two things really. On what you just said and some of the comments that you made earlier. There's someone in the chat room here who says, bring back 4-H club in schools, okay? Agriculture must be embedded in our children at an early age. And I guess the person is speaking to the fact that if agriculture is to be beneficial, we have to try to get young people into it. I want to get your take on that. But on the other hand, what do you say to government's position or government's comments that they are going to be providing 4,000 jobs from the tourism construction initiative, and that on as regards to agriculture, you cannot just take the specific allocation for agriculture as government's total financial commitment to agriculture, that there are certain elements of government's commitment that would fall under the Ministry of Works and other departments. How do you respond to that?
Okay, so firstly, let me respond to the comment in the chat. I think that person is right, that the 4-H clubs in the past have always played a very important role in the orientation of our mindset towards agriculture. From the primary school and so on, having some poultry or a piece of land to farm and so on is important as part of that orientation. So that is important. But equally important is that the society overall, led by government policies, must create the environment and the catalyst that allow persons to see the agricultural sector as a major sector that provides opportunities for income, for improvement in quality of life, and for high income learnings. The agriculture sector must provide an opportunity for young people to be able to apply technologies, ITC, to agriculture. This is important. This is key for us, right? So we must have a government that is thoughtful enough, that provide the policy framework that allow young people to say, you know what, I can apply my learning to agriculture in a different way than using the cutlass and the fork. But the culture and the fork in our context is important as well. Let's not fool ourselves. Our land terrain and so on is not generally lend itself to the current plows and the mechanization that is envisaged. But here's the other side of that story, Pablo. We can, in fact, use the minds of our young people and have them applied to invent technologies to plow the hilly lands, to plow the rock lands for us. You have technologies today, artificial intelligence, that produces vacuum cleaners, that climb and clean steps, right? That goes under beds and so on and corners and clean. Why can we not have technologists that develop mechanical plows to help us plow our terrain that is applicable to our terrain? That's when we got to move agriculture in research and development. Secondly, to the issue of the allocations. And I heard the argument that we must not look at just the direct budgetary allocation under agriculture, but that the budget is spread, that there are other things in other ministries that contribute towards agriculture, like in roads and so on and so forth. And that might be so. As I said on a previous program, I respect that, and government in its allocations will put road construction, for example, feeder road, not under agriculture, but under Ministry of Communication and Works. I know the Ministry of Agriculture as well will undertake its own diplomatic initiatives to mobilize resources outside of whatever government provides for it. That is also possible. But you know what this dispersal of funds in various ministries meant for agriculture mean? One or two things. I will ask the question as some people will ask, really? You do that? What is the power then of the minister and the Ministry of Agriculture to direct those resources into agriculture? The ministry and the minister will not be able to exercise direct power and control over the implementation of the policies because they do not have budgetary control over those monies. It therefore means that the Minister of Agriculture and the Ministry of Agriculture will have to get engaged in a negotiation with the other ministries that has those monies holding for them to be able to implement projects. It confuses the situation. It is not clean cut. It does not give the Ministry of Agriculture that overarching authority, in my humble opinion, right? I do not know how the cabinet works. I cannot speak of the internal machinations that goes on and how things are done and met and so on. But really and truly, it is a cause of concern for me when you say to me that the expenditures are in all other directions in under various ministries, and therefore it is meant for agriculture. Is it the same thing in the Ministry of Health? Is it the same thing under the Ministry of Finance? Is it the same model that is used in other ministries? I'm only hearing that argument when it comes to agriculture, and therefore I'll ask the question why.
Okay, now you're speaking about, you mentioned the issue of COVID, and we've been speaking about the whole need to restructure in the face of the COVID. Now, since COVID came, since we've been faced with the COVID-19 situation, we've seen different entities making an effort to sensitize the country, to sensitize the population on issues surrounding COVID. And I want to play a clip from an event that was organized by our communal cooperative, of which you participated in along with Dr. Dunstan Campbell. And I want to play that clip that I have labeled a development perspective. Our technical operator is supposed to have this lined up, and we'll continue the conversation afterwards. Brother John?
We have defined over time development to exclude the very human being. We have defined development as, or we have come to understood development to really be seen in terms of physical things, buildings, infrastructural works, glitziness. So the whole development paradigm for most people has been seen in the broad context of the extent to which you have this infrastructure that is all glitzy and glamorous and so. Technically, we have defined it in terms of the gross domestic product as a measurement of the goods and services that are produced in a country, and certainly in this case, Grenada from time to time. And really and truly, up until recently, if that is a true measurement, development ought to have taken place as we know it in the rural communities where the agricultural sector
was fundamentally the driving backbone of the Grenada economy up until probably Hurricane Ivan, post the Hurricane Ivan period, when tourism emerged as the strongest pillar of our economy. But I would like to refine development as being one that focuses on people and communities. I want to highlight a social aspect here of development, which is the role of the small shops and the role of the junctions, the four roads. Those were cross-cuttings that take place physically, but also had a very strong, powerful psychological impact and social impact, where people gathered, where people traded goods and services, and so forth, where discussions were held, and where things happened.
So, how critical do you think this perspective that you shared there on that program that was driven by the communal cooperative, where you shared the stage, you shared the panel with Dr. Dunstan Campbell, another son of St. John. How critical do you think that perspective is, that new paradigm is? Not just in terms of redefining, but in a practical sense of addressing that restructuring that you've been speaking to and creating jobs and so on and markets and so for the communities.
Pablo, yourself and your technical operator has done some serious deep searching, man. You all have done some deep dive into pull all this information together, you know. I see you have some depth in this. I think it's really important and relevant, Pablo. You know, COVID presented many hardships and continues to do so, but it also provided us with an opportunity to really restructure the way we have our economy currently, to bring the economy much more into localized village economies, right? Rather than a national tongue economy, St. George's tongue economy, right? And it's as relevant today as it was then, because the recent surge that we are seeing in COVID cases, we are heading to another lockdown. We should have built the village capacities way back then to provide for this, which we are seeing now. And it raises question, let me just divert a little, Pablo. It raises a question now about the capacity of persons that are engaged in leading this process at the policy level. Since COVID, I have transitioned into, among other things, looking at pandemics. So one of my other things I take on is a historian on pandemics, right? Especially in Grenada and in our region. And one of the things I've learned, and which I've been mentioning to folks, is that for every pandemic we experience, or for every global virus or disease that Grenada has been affected by, it normally happens either at the plateau of that global virus or disease, or coming down to the death stage, meaning not the death, let me give you a better word, or the declining phase of that virus in the developed world. We get this thing, you know, we get the tail of those viruses. We go back to yellow fever, we go back to all those diseases in the past that led to the quarantine station and quarantine points and so on, right? Even to the recent, most recent, the AIDS epidemic and so on. We got it at the tail end. So we should be expecting the same to happen with COVID. We should have been expected that once we start opening our borders, we will face with that situation. So having gone through what would be described as a relatively successful management of the period up to 3 weeks ago, we should have been planning for now, right? And we haven't done so. So we are worse off today. The situation is that we started reopening our economies when, I would argue, as a people, we started to shift our paradigm, looking at producing more and creating village economies. This morning, a shopper said to me, for example, he said, I would not be too bothered by another lockdown, he was thinking, he was talking from a business perspective after we dealt with all the health consequences. He said, because during the lockdown, I sold my things very well. He said, all the things on my shelf that were not selling were sold because the local people were coming in to shop at my shop. They were no longer going to the central supermarkets. The villagers were staying within the village and the economy was happening. The distributors of the products were coming in on specific days, delivering the products at my shop. And I was selling to my villagers, right? So this is when I talk about the village economy. It's also a very important part of that point, Pablo, is the issue of how do we define development? I am one that really avoid using GDP as a measure of development. It tells me, yes, how much an estimate of the resources of the country. But you know what it does not tell me? It does not tell me who own those resources. It does not tell me how the quality of life of the people of the country has improved. In one of my earlier texts on the UN Millennium Development Goals, right? A book that I did, I think I have a copy here. So no, it's called Poor Commonwealth No Longer with a question mark.
Okay.
I did a comparison, a relationship between countries' GDP and the quality of health issues, right? What I call the Human Development Index. And what I observed was that some countries with low levels of GDP had a higher Human Development Index than countries with high GDP. For example, Cuba, Jamaica. Those are countries that had relatively lower gross development product. In other words, their productive capacity and generation was much lower than some countries. But you know what? The people were enjoying higher quality of life in education, in science and technologies, in health, right? The people were accessing. So we have to shift that paradigm from concrete development to the human being. Let us go back and be our brother's keeper. But we can only do that not by talking about it, but by developing the economic and the political paradigm that allows that to happen, which put people at the center of our development, which put people at the center of whatever growth that is going to be taking place. And in that regard, Pablo, I will invite you, once I've concluded on it, I am working on the hosting of a high-level roundtable on health and wellness in COVIDious times, with a subtitle on reflecting on alternative medicine. I believe, and it has been documented, that Grenada has a rich quantity of herbal medicines, of herbs around. We call it bush, whatever. And I believe that we have the brains in Grenada that we need to pull together. We need to bring them together to put their minds on the use of our local herbs for health and wellness purposes in a very focused way. And I believe that Campeche has that responsibility in its continuing attempt to influence public policies.
Now, there are two things that came out, out of this this piece from you. One, you speak about different productions that you have been doing, that's intellectual works. And based on a conversation I had with a colleague of mine, what advice would you give to other producers of intellectual works in terms of getting the works out there into the market, whether it is in the US, in Europe, or wherever? And you touch on the herbal issue. As you bring it up, I will deal with it one time. Recently, there's been lots of conversation about the whole medical cannabis decriminalization. We see that CARICOM had set up a committee that reported back to them, and there's a host of recommendations coming out of it. We see that some of the CARICOM members have already started to take certain steps in that regard. We see recently that one of the major political parties, putting out their policy agenda as it relates to cannabis and so. And there's been that discussion that started, government now is saying that they have a task force in place and so. What's your take on the whole cannabis issue? Because some people are saying that it can be the savior, the economic savior, and others are saying, well, it may not necessarily be so, but it can be a major contributing factor once it's handled in the right way. So these are the two things: the intellectual work. How do people with the intellectual work get it out there in the wider community, and the cannabis issue?
On the first issue, I must say I am not the best example of how to get intellectual work out. I mean, I have done some things and I have ideas, but I have not been very good at producing and getting it out in the marketplace, right? But what I would say is that the internet and the developments from there provide an opportunity really for intellectuals and academics locally to really get their views out, get their ideas out, right? Using very low cost but effective methods. I mean, one of the things that you offer, your program offer, Comfort Zone, is an avenue to get your intellect out there, to get your views out in the public, have it in the public space. One of the unfortunate things is that as a people, we were not encouraged to speak on our views and our ideas. You will be described as pushy, as fussy, as you think you know it all. So we've been beaten down, right? An expression of views lead to you being put in a camp, right? Either a political camp or some other socio-cultural camp, and literally be ostracized, where you start to suffer from economic and social injustices. So many of us probably do not get out and put our intellect out there because we're afraid of the negative consequences. But I would encourage persons who have ideas to speak it out. You don't have to have a PhD to speak and to write and to publish. You don't have to have a university degree to speak and to write and to publish your ideas. These days, publications are coming not only in written forms, but a lot of voice, YouTube and Facebook and all those other media, they are available for us and we must use them. So I encourage
I think more specifically on that issue, we find that some of our writers, we produce, different works, books, whether it's poetry or whatever it is. But in terms of getting it into market and getting it marketed out there, I think it is more along that lines, these lines that the person was really referring to,
Well, one of the things that we, in that specific regard, Amazon has a platform that really allows you to get your works out there. Firstly, produce and get it marketed, right? The academic and intellectual work. That is something that we need to look at and find avenues to do it. We need to, I am not sure of the local context of what's available locally as vehicles for getting your work out, right? But I know there is production taking place. People are writing and they are publishing the books. But to the extent to which it is out there publicly sold and so on is a different matter. So Amazon has been used as a main platform, or local bookstores are also being used as a platform. And we need to find ways of doing that ourselves. Culturally, I know, for example, one of our boys from Guelph, I don't think I can give specifics on this program, but one of our cultural artists from Guelph is or has embarked on some major projects that would allow for the distribution of our cultural artists' work. Probably more will be said that by him in the coming weeks and months, but it's a really nice platform. On the second issue of the cannabis, I don't like using the word cannabis. Personally, I use the word ganja, marijuana.
Okay.
I think it is more akin to our culture and our environment.
Okay.
So I prefer to use that word, away from the scientific minglings and dissecting on it. Pablo, when this issue arose, again, I buried myself into doing research on it. I always remind folks, I do not speak publicly on things that I do not study. When I open my mouth on a matter to speak on it, or when I speak on a matter, I must do it from an informed basis, right? So this is one thing I looked at. In fact, I would say I promised to send you something which I haven't sent you as yet, but I'll get it to you pretty soon. It is an opportunity for us. It represents another product that we can in fact produce. I think we have to see it from a number of perspectives, right? One perspective, we have the health consequence of it, the health benefits to be derived, and that is well documented over the years. I mean, I recall way back in the early 1980s, right? There were works already done by UE and other institutions that points to the health benefit. Or cultural artists, or reggae singers from Bob Marley to the whole raft of them have spoken about the benefits of marijuana and so forth, which the scientists in the developed world are now confirming through scientific research. But our people had already known that by the usage research, by use of it. So the health benefits are enormous. The economic benefits are also to be had from this issue, right? So there are opportunities for us in the region and in Grenada to really look at this and to leverage it in the best way possible. However, we have some hurdles to climb. Let me just identify 2 or 3 of those hurdles that we need to address. One of the major hurdles that we need to address is the issue of the legal framework through which we'll be allowed to grow and manufacture the byproducts of this herb, all right? This important herb. So we need to establish a clear legal framework that allows for it, right? The second thing we have to look at is the governance of this, right? In other words, are we going to allow everyone to grow and everyone to export the raw herb? The third element is the value addition and how we are going to treat it. Are we going to treat it in the same way as we have treated nutmeg and cocoa and bananas over the years? Or are we going to take a high value added approach to this product? With regard to all of these, there's another critical element which I have not heard talked about yet. Now, our major trading partner in the United States, one of them I should say, and in fact, the European Union as well, there is not a universal law that yet provides for the production and distribution of marijuana, of cannabis in any of those regions. In the United States, there is no federal law, right, that gives carte blanche cover for the production and distribution of marijuana and its byproducts. So what are the implications of that? So far we have a number of states that have recognized it and have given way to it, but it's not a federal law. What are the implications for countries like Grenada, even if we were to pass laws that regulate and regularize and decriminalize marijuana? What does it do for us? You know what the implication is going to be on our financial institutions? How the United States and the developed world will in fact treat our financial institutions that are going to be recipients of financial gains from the trade in marijuana? Will they treat it as legal? Will it be categorized in the same way as money laundering and drug dealing? This is an important aspect of this debate that we must get involved in, because the banks will be receiving monies. If we were to legalize this trade, it has implications for the financial services sector. So this has to be cleared. It's not just legalize it, grow it. It's one aspect. The financial aspect is critical. Secondly, I mentioned governance. And my suggestion, to cut it short, is I have proposed looking at the Gcne and the COCO model, where we have farmers that are given legal title to produce, for example, nutmegs. In order to sell nutmegs, you must have a nutmeg card. You must become a member of the association and be shown that you have nutmeg trees. So we do that, and we set up an entity, whether it's a cooperative among producers or a private company, right, or a public limited company. We set up a central unit for the purchase and processing and manufacturing and distribution. And I deliberately add manufacturing because for us to make a dent, we must manufacture. One of my concerns is whether we are coming from behind the curve. And look at how it has happened. Look at it, my people. Listen to what I am saying. The United States and the developed countries are now ready to open up the markets and to legalize this product because they have studied it sufficiently. They have mastered the supply chain and the value-added chain in that product, so they can go from production under greenhouse conditions. They have the factories to produce the different high-value items that are derived from this product. And now they control that market. They are now easing up the space for us to see whether we can make a dent on it or not. What are the implications for us? It means that we must now begin to apply our minds to understanding that supply chain, to understanding the global value chain for marijuana, right? And ask ourselves, how can we be different and unique to find ourselves competing successfully in the global marketplace for this unique product?
Now, sticking with the whole issue of finances, because we're speaking as to how this can be part of our overall economy. We did touch on the budget lightly at the beginning. I want to bring back certain elements of the budget and to get your take on it, because we see recently mention being made that although there's been no new taxes announced in the budget, it is anticipated that with the review that government has indicated they will be doing in the new year, that you can see increases in different fees and licenses and so on. I want you to speak to that. But in addition to that, there's another element of the budget or there's other elements that some people feel should be part of the budgetary conversation that's not there. Like, for example, the person, one person says that when you look at what happened over the last 4 years, 2016 to 2020, the government has stated time and again that we have seen growth of 5% per year, and so over 4 years, that's 20%. But the budget has not moved more than 3%, and there is nothing to show for that growth. On the other hand, the person says that making obvious reference to the theme of the 2020-21 budget, they say, which says towards Vision 2035, recovery, transformation, and resilience. the person is saying that the budget is for this year, but the allocations for the objectives for the budget fits within the context of the overall plan, because mention was made as to how many $1 billion will be spent. And I mean, that sounds like a big figure in a lot of people's head. And because it's coming within the context of the one-year budget, it can be very misleading. They go on to say that if you have a plan for the next 10 years and there's pieces that need to be put in place, you need to start this year's budget. You see how you indicate what the allocations are, and at the end of it, you do an assessment, see what you've accomplished, what you have not accomplished, and what you need to do going forward. And another element that they mentioned is that allocations are given to members of parliament, because we saw that the allocation had been increased under this administration since they came into office in 2013. And that's not reflected in the budget presentations and in the budget conversation. What's your, what do you can you share on these issues?
Right. Certainly the person has identified some critical areas really that we need to look at. And it is for those very reasons that the person have indicated that I have taken an approach, Pablo, a personal approach, in which I asked myself, should I spend time really contemplating this budget? Really? What does it worth individual time? Because
if I may just interject here, the person concluded by saying, so as far as I am concerned, I don't waste time trying to opine on this year's budget. It is a complete waste of time and is not what the paper it's written on.
I certainly could concur with those views, except from a development perspective. I want to have a sense of what is happening where and to be knowledgeable. But really, practically, it does not make much sense for the following reasons. One, and I confirm with that person and many others. One, this budget, as many other budgets in the country,
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this budget, like many other budgets in the past, really does not fit into a grand picture. It is a hodgepodge of ideas that people pull together with some other objectives in mind rather than economic development. It does not fit into the theme of the budget. There is no relationship whatsoever as far as I'm concerned. Secondly, Pablo, and this is where we must be sincere with our people and be honest with our people. If we were to, as I've done, look at the budgets over the years, almost every forecast that has been made, so almost everyone, save and except revenue, and I'll come to the revenue issue, we have failed to meet it by between 10 to 15% on average. We have failed, especially on issues of implementation of projects, because our country is run by projects, right? It's in a project here and a project there and so on and so forth. Not a comprehensive, cohesive set of programs and policy initiatives that gel together so we can see the rising of the water and the rising of the tide is by projects. And there has been a colossal failure, right, to achieve those targets every single year. We have been underperforming. We have an implementation deficit in this country. Every single year, we failing to implement projects and programs by over 15, an average of 20 to 40%. So there's an implementation deficit. So every year, we forecast that we're going to implement projects of X amount, especially on the capital side of the budget, but we underperform. We underperform with grants. Whatever is projected, we are going to be performing less. We underperform on capital expenditure, right? The only area in which there hasn't been an underperformance is on taxation, is on revenue rather, because government has a vigorous taxation policy. They have increased the number of taxes that we have paid in the last 5 years. And with that increased number of taxes and charges, because some of them come in the form of charges, little charges here and there, not as a tax, all right? We have seen an increase in revenue earnings on the backs of the people, the decimation of the middle classes and so on, right? And keeping the poor where just at that level to keep them, you know, bobbing and weaving a little bit, but no real development taking place. So there hasn't been any real growth, right? So we have an undercapacity, a lack of ability to implement projects, right? It is reflected by the fact that there is no capacity. There's an absence of capacities in the ministry and in the public sector to implement those projects. So why are we now coming with a budget this year that focused over $122 or so million in capital expenditure, when over the years we have demonstrated and shown that we are barely able to do it? We are forecasting an economic growth of about 6.4% or thereabout, when in fact we have been on the decline. We have declined by over 12% in economic growth, right? We are heading to a shutdown. And you know why that is happening? Let me make this point. We have skewed our development over the years on tourism. We are building a sector on tourism at the exclusion of everything else. But the type of tourism that is reflected in the Citizenship by Investment program. And we are building it and creating low-end jobs, not high-quality, high-level jobs for our people, which our people deserves. No, low-quality jobs. This budget has not, for example, point to the creation of high-level, high-quality jobs for our people, which we badly need. So of the over $122 million that has been accounted for, that has been budgeted for capital projects, the National Transformation Fund is expected to contribute over 60 to 80% of that. And with the revenue, personal income tax is expected to contribute what, $63.6 million. VAT on the inland revenue side, $101.4 million, right? In customs, VAT is expected to bring in $108 or so $0.7 million, right? So it's an economy that is structured on taxation and building expectation for expenditure that does not materialize and has not materialized. So we are building people's expectation with these numbers. And that's why this year I have decided a way to get away from this number stock. You know what I really propose? I've been speaking to some colleagues in the civil society on this. Let's put this budget aside for this year. And let us do a people's budget. Let us call our peoples together and provide an alternative budget. No, it wouldn't have impact in terms of what happens in the economy. But I'm saying that to make the point that we need to relook development. We need to relook these models. We need to relook a country that decides to grow by construction in a time where we are faced with a health crisis, in a time when we are faced with the challenge of restructuring this economy to serve our people and to serve our people better. At a time when we are saying, yes, we are open to the international community, but we must do it in a managed way, where COVID is demonstrating to us a two-edged issue, that whereas we rely on the international community for health benefits in terms of vaccines and other things and so on, at the same time, COVID is saying to us, you have to protect yourself. You have to protect your borders. So how do we straddle a world which is sending two diverse messages to us? One which says, close your borders to protect your health, and one which saying, you gotta remain open because you need the international community. And that leads me to a core issue that is debated at this point, and the budget sort of seeks to, as they have said, discuss the issue of lives and livelihoods. I do not split such. There is no hood without lives. Lives come first. Economy come after. Who is going to run the economy if you do not have lives? So we need to protect the lives. So back to the core of the budget issue, when I've looked at the numbers and so forth, all that I'm seeing is false expectations, false hopes, because we do not have the capacity to implement those grand projects idea, which is capital projects, construction based. And what are the construction projects are we talking about? Are we talking about fixing and repairing completely the Western Main Road? Are we talking about solving the problems in Molyneux and dealing with the consequences of our bus drivers and private vehicle owners that has to traverse the Mount Morris Road or the Willis Roads, the wear and tear on vehicles? I am now seeing more vehicles on the road with the tires, right, blown off. More axles are falling on the road more than ever before. Just drive up the western side and see the conditions. But we are relying on some sets of major projects that will be built through the National Transformation Fund for this to happen. So we are in a drag, we are in an economic drag. And this budget is not going to take us out of the hole that continuing declining hole that we are in. We need a new paradigm. We need to have the people together to discuss not a budget, but a development agenda for Grenada, Carriacou and Petit Martinique. That's what we need right now. We need a development agenda, not a budget, right?
Okay.
We need to focus on a development agenda. That's what we need.
We are seeing that our development agenda is tied to the building of our Caribbean civilization and our Caribbean community. And so much so that the cannabis / marijuana ganja conversation has been driven by a CARICOM initiative. And so we see for his end of term presentation, the ambassador, the Secretary General of CARICOM, Ambassador Orin Larocque, he is saying that, quote, enhancing the involvement of major stakeholders in the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, CSME, received a boost early this month when I signed a memorandum of understanding with the CARICOM Private Sector Organization, Inc., CPSO. The organization joined the Caribbean Congress of Labor, CCL, as an associate institution of the community. These two organizations, along with the representative body for civil society, are important voices to be heard in advancing the integration movement, particularly the CSME. Already, the CPSO has put forward proposals to boost food security for economic recovery post-COVID-19. The question is, how critical is the CSME to our own domestic situation? And on the question of civil society, we see that government has conveniently embraced civil society, like when we went into the homegrown
structural adjustment.
The homegrown structural adjustment program. And then on other issues of development, when civil society speak out on those issues, they are maligned, they are condemned, they are castigated as being anti-development, like when they call for EPAs to be done in terms of certain development projects. How do you see us going forward in terms of enabling that kind of relationship between government and civil society so as to make it work in the best interest of the country and the people, and the significance of the CSME in all of that?
They're very important. I think that after years of experience, our policymakers, our regional institutions should acknowledge by now that the governments are not the residents of best ideas and best policies, but that within each of our countries, we have a wealth of knowledge that are dispersed in various sectors, that if we were to pull them together, we can develop a common approach, a common set of programs and policies to aid in our overall development. And hence the importance of civil society. Civil society has a very important role to play in our overall development. As you have pointed out, Pablo, they have contributed to a number of things that otherwise would not have happened. In Grenada here, they continue to be advocates on a number of issues, from electioneering reform to economic development issues, fighting poverty in rural communities, providing education and so on. But as you have also correctly pointed out, civil society engagement in our specific context here seems to be one where only we need to tick the box, right? So you say you engage civil society, they come, they participate, but later on we find our views, because I'm also part of that, sector. We do not find our views always reflected where it matters. So that's an issue, but we can contribute towards enhanced policies and enhanced programs. Civil society is not to be seen as an alternative to government. Civil society is not trying to occupy the same governance space of political parties and governments, but are trying to contribute to the people's space, to be the voices for people in the overall thrust for development. And hence it brings us to the CSME. The single market, the Caribbean single market and economy, I think is very important for our overall development. As a Caribbean people, I think there is much to be gained by having a unified organization, a unified set of countries with common rules and regulations and so on that will help us to grow and develop. We look at Asia and what has happened there. We look at what's happening in various regions of Africa, the growth and so that has been taking place. In the Caribbean, we certainly need to look in that same direction and consolidating ourselves in the CSME. But unfortunately, despite high expectations, I do not think the wider CSME has worked and has been as effective as the founders would like it to be. We can look at various issues and do the comparison, but let us look at the immediate one that is before us. The marijuana issue, or what you might refer to, Pablo, as the cannabis issue. We are operating at different speeds. Individual countries are still operating at different speeds. The unified action that is required is not happening in the way that it should. For example, the free movement of capital, the free movement of labor, of people throughout the region is still an issue, right? With countries applying their own perceived rules and regulations, right? So CARICOM is important and has a really important role to play. I mean, I long for the day when CARICOM will achieve a status in a real sense that drives the region together in collective ways and responsibilities, in the same way or in a similar way that the European Union has. I mean, the European Union, as we know, has its weaknesses, it has its fault lines, most notably Brexit, right? Is a clear example of the fault lines that build the European Union. But we are a new part of the world and we need to get into this new narrative. I mean, we have started this road way back in the 1950s, 1960s of trying to build one Caribbean, one economic and political space. But we are way behind. We are way behind. We are falling behind. And the issue for, as far as I can see and assess it, is the lack of commitment of some of the leaders in our countries, in our respective countries, really willing to work by a common agenda. For some, it is always about the next election. How can I win the next election? How can I stew my economy and my policies so that I win the next election? It is not how do I build my people up and build my country up. And as a result of building them up, I will benefit by receiving the political capital and the political profit that comes out of it. It is the other way around. Let me first seek political dominance. And generally, the desire for political dominance does not lend itself to the development of us all. So it's a real issue that we need to look at. I do not have a prescription as to how we can get out of it.
Okay.
But one of the things I do know from my work at the ACP in Brussels, working with the ACP and the European Union and other international organizations, I think that we have the potential to make something beautiful of our region and good. Look at the OECS. Look at what we have done so far within our OECS. And I think sometimes we probably need to pay a little more attention to how we can take the OECS further rather than trying to build the big CARICOM region. In the OECS, we have so many common policies on airspace, right? On pharmaceuticals, right? On the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, a leading global example of a central bank of one currency serving so many countries. It is something that I feel very, very proud of, our Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. I remember being in Brussels and colleagues from many African countries and eventually the African Development Bank came to me and wanted to know more about the ECCB. And in fact, that led to a delegation from the Africa Development Bank traveling to St. Kitts to learn about our monetary model. We have things that we are very proud of. And I think sometimes we need to look at the OECS to foster that change and development and to move to the wider region. But we really need leadership. It comes down to leadership within our region that can pull our people together. And our people are always willing to support leadership that is all encompassing, right? But somewhere along the line, ego is coming the way, and our dream as a Caribbean people die. Therefore, the consequence is that the Caribbean people must find ways, creative ways, to drive our Caribbean people's agenda. Because we are realizing that the current leadership is not doing it for us, but we desire it. We desire it as a people.
You know, we come into the end, we get to the end now with time, but there's a couple of issues that I really want to deal with here before we leave. It's interesting that you raised the issue of the currency, because that's one of the things that I usually point to make the point that if Grenada, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, if each one of us had our own currency, the state of our economy, you know, the value of our dollars would be like nothing given our quote unquote GDP and all the other elements that go with it. Anyway, COVID-19. We see very early in the year, in April at least, you had an article called Bending and Flattening the Curve. Can you just give us a synopsis of what were you speaking to and whether we have accomplished that, and putting it in the context of the recent developments with that, what I called the pure Grenada COVID-19 debacle, right? Between government, Grenada government versus Sandals. Can you speak to that? The short version.
Yeah, the short version. Quickly, when I wrote this article, it was a research paper I was embarking upon to really look at what we need to do and what has been the global experience in in really controlling COVID. I think I came up with about 9 elements that we need to bring together to make sure that it is controlled. It's a piece of work I think I really should have taken globally and published it, because I saw one of the CNN producers actually produce something very similar and was, in international space on it. But we have not done well with it, Pablo. We have dropped the ball. Our government has dropped the ball, and especially on the issue of controlling our borders. One of the critical elements of that research that I did in order to write this article, even in the early days yet, was the absolute importance of controlling of our borders. Because the previous article that I did on that, I think it was entitled The Internationalization of COVID. No, not internationalization, sorry. The globalization of COVID. To show that COVID was really a global phenomenon. And as capital became internationalized or has become internationalized and labeled, so too will COVID. It is going to be a pandemic and we're going to be importing it. So the way you control imports is through your borders. You have border controls. Now, the example is very clear. While we had border controls, we were relatively good. We had carnival in Sates. People thought there was going to be an explosion of COVID. It did not happen.
We had carnival in all the constituencies.
Right. At carnival, there was no direct case of COVID arising. There was a big fete in Bathway.
Yes, I saw it with my own eyes.
Exactly. And there was not a single case. So that gave me the confidence that within our borders, the threat of COVID was very minimal. It's there. We had to be careful, but the results were showing that they were not. We went and we started opening our borders with a 2-track system, a policy which punishes the Grenadian people. And this policy that we are seeing, which led to this silver sand issue, Pablo, may I remind your viewers and listeners,
the sandals.
It's not new. It is a continuum of this government policy that puts Grenadians at the back burner and put others ahead of us, giving them preferential treatment at our demise. And therefore, when you run a 2-track system that allows visitors, and we welcome visitors, we want to share Grenada with our visitors. We don't want Grenada always to be closed, but we want to do it in a responsible way, in a way that first secures the lives of our people and our visitors. It is a mutually beneficial thing for us. But the policy that puts our people down and put others people came into play, and we now have the second spread of COVID. The nitty-gritty of it, the details of how it happens and so on, I don't want to get into that as yet. I'm still doing some nitty-gritty research, but one thing that is very clear, it represents a colossal failure of government policies. It is government policies, the failure to control the borders and to control the institutions. Sandals do not run our government. We elect our government to run institutions like Sandals. And there is no amount of argument that can be put forward to me that says Sandals is the sole organization responsible for what has happened. I cannot say that as yet. I am looking at the supply chain that brings visitors from their home territory to Grenada. Let us examine every node in that supply chain and see where the downfall took place, where the deficit took place, and place responsibilities where they are at this point. But it is sad. My heart goes out to the people affected by this. It is terrible for Grenada. It is terrible for business. And worse yet, it threatens the lives of our people. And that should have never, ever be allowed to happen. Grenadian people, wake up, smell the coffee, and protect lives. Take actions at local, family, and national level that will secure you. The presidential change is taking place in the United States today because the incumbent president is accused of not protecting the lives of the citizens of the United States, i.e. protecting them from COVID.
Okay. I know it was just a slip of the tongue when you said silver sands. It's sandals that we actually speaking of.
Yes,
but John, just allow me this word. Now, you speak about this development and this two-tier way of way government is functioning and so. And there's been that concern that functioning in that way is not representative of a good governance agenda, and it leaves room for rampant corruption. How critical do you think is corruption to a good governance agenda, and what kind of impact does it have on, overall economic prospects of a country? In a conversation recently with a gentleman, he's a public servant. He's one who advocates on social media and so. And he's saying, when we were doing a comparative analysis between the two administrations, NNP versus NDC, he's saying, well, taking out the corruption element, NNP has done better than NDC. But while he was pointing to the quote-unquote infighting that would have impacted the NDC's administration in a negative way. So I had to say to him, well, if you take out the infighting element, what do you say? So, but just speak to that corruption issue and the kind of impact it has on governments and on economies.
It is a well-established fact that corruption denies the population of real benefits. The international organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, the European Union, they have all done significant amount of research and has published on the impact of corruption on development. It minimizes it, it marginalizes development. Monies that should be going to the people, for the people's benefit, end up in the pockets of people that are used for other things, right? In fact, in my publication on the Poor Commonwealth, on the UN MDG goals rather, there are a couple of pages that are dedicated to this issue and to see how it undermines development. It is a cost to the development of the country. So policymakers owe it to be responsible in their actions, to be responsible in the kind of decisions that they make, so that it does not have these negative consequences on the very people whom have selected you to represent them and to protect them, to give them development. So we have to understand that these things undermines development. It marginalizes development and is a cost, is a serious cost to the people. I have an African colleague that did a very masterful piece on aid. I can't remember the title of that book, but it's something I would have wanted to reference to your listeners and viewers to read, to see how corruption and the ill use of money. And sometimes these practices probably does not always come in the form of a fattening of pockets, it takes various forms, right? It's not that a man fattening a pocket and he's taking on, it takes different forms, but the point is that it undermines development. And it's something that we must be very, very mindful about, right? I mean, so we have to look at, so if you are given $10 to spend on a development project, and 4 of that $10 find itself in use other than that which it was meant for, it means that you have shortchanged the beneficiaries of that project by $4, right? You have shortchanged them, simple. There's no other way about it. So the question is that, what do we want? Do we want to benefit from our sweat and our tears to the full potential? Are we willing to fold our arms and say, you know what? I am getting some, so if some get diverted into other avenues, I don't mind. This is terrible. This is a terrible way to think. It undermines us as a people. It undermines our trust, under our credibility, and so on, and it has damaging consequences on future generations. The last point I want to make, if I'm allowed to, Pablo, on this issue of our policies and the skewedness of our policies towards tourism and the related effects and consequences of that, is the cultural impact it's having on our people. Dire consequences and cultural clashes. Let me just give you one example quickly to tell you what is happening here. A couple days ago, my family and I were driving down Grenada. My son was with me, 7 years old. We got to the point where there's some construction work taking place. So I stopped because there was a tractor that was in front of there doing some work. So I couldn't run through the tractor. I obviously had to stop. So I stopped. The vehicle behind me, I started, the horn started pounding away. When I looked, I saw some people, not of our type, traveling, some Caucasian, 2 Caucasian folks, zoom past me, but had to stop because the tractor was in the way. So I tooted, while they were passing, I tooted my horn, not in an aggressive way, in a way to alert them that there is an obstacle in front there, so be careful. You know what I got from this? I got some thumbs up. Not thumbs up as this, but the middle finger. I got the middle finger, and I was shocked. And I was saying to my family, but no, in Grenada, when we sound horns, it is meant to be friendly, not aggressive. 90% of the sounding of a horn is meant to be, wait, I'm coming. 90% of the sounding of a horns are meant to be friendly. Saying hi to somebody, alerting them of me, say, you're going around a corner, you sound your horn because you want to alert the driver that is coming. This is a cultural cost. So when I eventually catch up with the gentleman, I politely stopped to explain to him that I wasn't aggressive, I was simply alerting you to the danger ahead of you. Why did you do what you did? I got a barrage again. So I took the necessary actions, right? It shows when we skewed our country in a particular way and we give importees into our countries a certain perception of who we are as a people, what get catapulted downwards, right? Because the policymakers are certainly sending certain signals at this point in time that marginalizes us as a people. And I want our brothers and sisters, our countrymen, our fellow men, and the good wishers of Grenada to begin to wake up and observe what is happening in this country. The cultural shifts that are taking place, that is not known to us, is not part of our people. The tooting of our horns in Grenada is not the same as the tooting of our horns in New York, or in a bigger city, or in Rome, right? Or in some other capital, major developed capital. It is about, we know you. Hey, Pablo,
yes,
how you doing, man? Right? It is cultural. And we are losing our cultural identity because of national policies that are pursued by this government. And I have absolutely no doubt about that. And I've cataloged many more examples that I see on a daily basis. For Judy, right? Is an example. I would not be specific. I just say events down there pointed, very pointed to what's happening. Or people must wake up in this new Caribbean reality that we are looking at. In this need to restructure our economies, we must also seek to restructure our minds and our policymakers. And we must elect policymakers and put policymakers in place that will first and foremost see the defense of the Grenadian citizenry has been paramount. The safety and security of our people is the #1 objective of any government. And we need to evaluate and make judgments along those lines. And those of us that have the ability to contribute to making Grenada a better place, now and in the future, let us get out of the comfort zone. Let us get out from our comfort zone.
Our comfort zone and step. Yeah. Right. Now, speaking of those of us who have the ability to make that contribution, that's final. I've heard your name mentioned. You're from St. John's. You've accomplished much academically and otherwise. There's certain things that you can bring to the table in terms of thinking, in terms of ideas, in terms of administration. And so are you open or receptive to participating in our election process, to becoming a candidate in elections? I've heard your name being mentioned on the ground. There's people in your community, there's people in the wider St. John community, even St. Mark here, that see you as somebody who fits the bill. What's your position on that? That's
Well,
your
first,
final question. And you wrap up after that.
well, firstly, Pablo, I must say, well, let me be gracious to the people who are thinking in that way, that they see me as someone who can make a contribution towards that, you know, the furtherance of the quality of lives of people and so on. I suppose they might have looked at my life over the last 5 or so decades and recognized that I'm a son of the soil. I've always been here, and I've always been working on behalf of all people where probably there were opportunities in other areas that I did not pursue, but I've chosen to work for my people at every turn in my career and development. With regards to participating in elections, I will say this: I am open to contributing towards public life, towards public policy. My reason for being in Grenada all my life, whereas most of my other colleagues who I completed sixth form college with left Grenada and found so-called greener pastures, the way they may perceive it, I chose to remain here, always with the hope of contributing to public policy and the elevation of our people. By and large, I have sought these opportunities. They were not always, I was not always really successful within the public space of contributing towards those public policies. And therefore I worked in the private sector for a while. I worked with government institutions for a while, and mainly by myself, lecturing and doing other things. But I am desirous of contributing towards public life. I want to contribute in a way that uplifts and make Grenada a better place. I want to contribute towards the upliftment of life for every citizen, not only in St. John's, but St. John's first and foremost, certainly my village of Concord and the neighboring villages. And that's why, Pablo, I call my small consultancy from Campeche. Campeche is a village in Marigot on the way to the cemetery, Paul Park Cemetery. That village is Campeche. That's where I was born, but we later moved to Maine, Concord. Okay. It is part of my recognition of my place of birth and my people. Long and short, I always seek to contribute towards public policy, towards the development of my country. And okay. I will leave it at this for now. With regard to the party politics, at the moment, it is not a priority on my list, but I would like to contribute towards public policy in a significant way, And the people of St. John's and persons like yourself, Pablo, and St. Mark's, as you have indicated, might be well influential in that choice. All right, in that character.
All right. Okay, well, thank you very much. 30 seconds. Any final words?
Final word is that Grenadians, I want you to take charge of your destiny, of your future. I want you to find ways to see how you can contribute towards the furtherance of the development of our communities and our country, improving the quality of our lives. I want you to take back that strength that you had, and importantly, pride. I want us to go back to the base of having pride in ourselves, pride as a people, patriotism of our people. Drive it. Let us go back, as far as I'm concerned, to the era of Eric Matthew Gary, the era of Maurice Bishop, or revolution, when we had pride, where we are patriotic as a people. And let us use that to drive development further, right? That's what we need now. We need pride in ourselves. We need to build the patriotic spirit and the patriotic base. After that, budget's going to come. Development plan is going to come. But let us now go into self-confidence mode. Build pride, build confidence. And if there's anything I can do in that process, I am more than willing to do it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen Fletcher. It was a pleasure having you here on the Comfort Zone, and I look forward to you coming back sometime again. Brother John has already indicated that he would really like to have you back sometime. I want to apologize to Brother John for going over, but I just wanted to get these bits, these nitty-gritties in coming to the end of the conversation. I want to say thank you to those who joined us, those who made comments in the shout box, and I want to remind you that this is the final Comfort Zone program for 2020. I want to wish you all the best for the holiday season and a bright and prosperous new year, and you can look forward to me coming back and continuing to do the Comfort Zone program as long as Brother John gives me the okay to do so in the new year 2021. All the best, Brother John.